Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest monologue coming from Magadino in Switzerland. And this will be another one in the spiritual series, and talking about something quite close to my heart, which is academia. The greatest basis of the spiritual problems we have in Kenya is reflected in academia, and our academics are probably, I wouldn't say the most guilty, but we are behind a lot of the problems that our society faces. Many societies face the same problems, but usually academia is the key out of them. People study how to solve these problems and then offer solutions, and government either adopts them or not, or society either adopts them or not. But other in other words, the progress of human society depends on how we study and look at ourselves and get ourselves from one state of being to hopefully a better state of being going forward. Academics in Kenya are extraordinarily hollow people, and it's my personal contact with academia around the world. Um, that's one of the greatest benefits of it. It gives you an outside perspective on which to examine yourself as a Kenyan academic. Now let's look at Kenyan academics and loosely put, I'll look at the category of those who have doctorates. These are an extraordinarily important part of any society. But those in Kenya, we solve our problems and progress as a nation in spite of these people. And the reason is why, this is the reason. Kenya has many people with doctorates, many of them. But the saddest thing about them is that they thought, and so many of them think, the doctorate itself was an objective rather than a tool with which to achieve other personal and national objectives in line with what you've studied. And here's the difference. In many other countries, you will meet someone who has a doctorate, be it in history, languages, arts, science, physics, whatever. And you know them for a bit of time, and you know, oh, he's a physicist. Not even without asking him. Some of these people, we don't even know them personally, but you listen to what they say. They're always referring to something in physics. They're always referring to something in the arts. They're referring to something in music, and you come to realize, oh, that's what he or she studied. Even here in Kenya, we have a few practitioners who talk a lot about their fields, and you realize, oh, that's what he studies. That's what he's an expert in. For example, I have friends like Wandia Njoya is always talking about the arts, and you sort of realize, oh, she must study about the arts. I have another friend called Eva Komba. She's always, whether talking about agriculture, she talks about it in the perspective of women's rights, whether business in the perspective of gender issues, etc. And you realize, oh, that's our area of expertise. But these are exceptions in Kenya. So many people, especially those in senior government positions, are Dr. So and so, Professor so and so, but you only find out from literature, oh, he studied that. We have prominent people who have studied wetlands ecology, for example, and we've never heard them talk about wetlands ecology. We've got those who studied medicine, never hear them them say anything in the medical field, particularly those who get into state positions, and politics, etc. So you can find a specialist in medicine, and he happens to be a member of parliament, and there's a very intense debate on something to do with the public health, and they will not contribute a word from that perspective. Likewise, you have engineers or such in parliament, and we are talking about construction of this and that infrastructure, and they will not have a word to say about it. And that's because they feel that their qualifications were objectives in themselves rather than channels through which they can contribute to human society. And this is a deep spiritual problem. And those who feel the biggest brunt of this problem are the graduate students or those unfortunate enough to be working under these scholars at one level or another. Because you get suppressed, these people become watchmen. Our universities are fully staffed with them, and our universities do not realize the importance of academic qualifications. That's why we have a strange position in a university called the deputy vice chancellor in charge of finance. So you take a professor of history or something and put him in charge of the finances of the university. He doesn't know anything whatsoever about accounting. Nothing at all. Nothing about financial planning. But he's in charge of arguably the most important office in the university as far as resource allocation is, whether for studies or infrastructure development or bursaries or whatever. It's in charge of a financially illiterate person. It's under the charge of a financially illiterate person. And this goes down all the way. You have a specialist in geography or biology. He's the registrar keeping records of the university. What does he know about record keeping or administration? What are we expecting from these people? And that's why our universities are getting bogged down in doing so many things, that in misusing the extraordinarily highly qualified human resources and not contributing in the way they should to our society. We have universities running programs like bakeries, and I'm sure the person in charge of that bakery is a professor. What does he know about baking bread or different yeasts or wheat or fiber content in bread? Those things that bakers need to know. We must, and by we, I'm talking about those who have higher qualifications in Kenya. We must find a way to make these qualifications contribute to the betterment of our society. That's why when people are thinkers in their fields, I've experienced this as well. People come and ask me, who funds your research? What do you mean, who funds my research? I don't need funds to think. I don't need funds to read. I don't need funds to analyze what I see around me. But our scholars are so hollow that unless someone is paying him to look at a particular problem in society, he won't do it. So when someone analyzes certain issues, that's the first question they come: who funds you? Where do you get funds to do this? Or even those who you criticize often say that he's been funded by someone or the other to criticize this. You are not expected, despite your qualifications, to have any educated opinion on anything at all. This is a situation, a psychological situation that's unique to Kenya. At least I've not had the misfortune of seeing it in any other place. Why is it that we need funding to think about a field which we spent 10, some even more years studying? And this is why we as academics fail to even encourage research in our particular fields. We had look at the failed competency based curriculum we have in Kenya. The first thing that Kenya Kwanza government did in office, or one of the first thing, was to gather a whole lot of indolent academics and professors and make a committee to examine or review this thing. And the first thing, at the very launch of the exercise, the deputy president said, we are not going to review the system, completely preempting and blowing a hole through the whole exercise. At that point, any academic worth his salt in that group would have just stepped down and said, okay, this is an exercise in futility. We are being used to sanitize something that's bad. But no, they went ahead. And because of the per diems were very good, especially since they went around the entire country. Right now, again, we are appointing another committee The court has ordered the CS for education to appoint another committee of useless experts to look at the competency-based curriculum and maybe tell us why it's failed. Yet it was all wrong from the very beginning, from its foundation. But this is what academics do. Since I have a PhD, it entitles me to be put on some useless committee and earn per diem. That's just what it is. But you can visit many scholars' houses and you don't see much in terms of books or literature that they may be reading or referring to. They don't write anything or write very little outside the slave gulag that is peer reviewed publications, which is this is not a these are not exercises in intellectual exercises. They're just political exercises. You get your name on a list of authors or on a paper which you may or may not know anything about. Maybe you are there because you approved the funding for it. You could be there because you supervised the student who did it, or you could be there simply because you're a friend of one of the other authors. Being an author on those papers actually doesn't mean anything until you actually talk to someone to find out if they know about it. So it could have been done under your grant or something. So the real writing, the real academic exercise is putting something out there, exposing it to criticism from the general public, not speaking to the choir of your so-called peers, exposing it to the general public, those who may not be expert, and having them criticize it and being able to explain it to those who are not as expert as you are. Then that is what it means, I think, in my opinion, to justify your master's degree, showing that you mastered a subject, or if you have a doctorate, you are a doctor of philosophy. Now you're talking about the philosophy of, in my case, wildlife ecology and management, the philosophy of education in the case of those who studied education, philosophy of engineering and construction in the case of those who studied those fields. Then you are now contributing to the society. But just using the way we use these qualifications in Kenya is just it qualifies you to get to a higher position to polish someone else's shoes. So a less qualified person polishes shoes at a lower level than the guy with the PhD. The guy with the PhD probably gets the privilege of polishing a minister's shoes or president's shoes in terms of approving whatever they say and making it look good. That doesn't work. That doesn't help a nation. But it's a sign of a deep spiritual malaise that manifests in this extraordinary laziness. So that we do something wrong and we actually gather people around and form a committee to examine why we are doing it wrong, and they do this wrong and write a report and earn their per diem, and another committee comes together of useless experts comes together to examine the other thing that's wrong and ad infinitum, and nothing gets solved. And our so-called qualified people don't contribute anything to our society. And they also discourage students. They channel students towards doing unimportant topics. They approve proposals that offer the easiest, i.e., simplest work, rather than approve those that actually criticize something in society. And students will tell you that, especially those in departments like political science, that's why those departments are dying now, because they don't want to the professors therein don't want to handle anything that's relevant to our politics. So why study political science? Because they're all cowards. The ridiculous political process that was the Building Bridges initiative was led by professors of political science and advised by them. Professors of history don't want to study, advise thesis on contemporary current Kenyan history because they aspire to state jobs, and this may mark them out as critics of politicians in the current system. And they're too indolent, cowardly, and spiritually hollow to do that. Likewise with those in conservation field. The failure of our conservation policies at every level, you'll find a PhD in conservation Kenyan polishing the boots of unqualified foreigners. This is the spiritual problem of academia, and that's why I tell those who may not have higher qualifications, do not do not take highly qualified people at face value. Do not believe what Mordecai says because he has a PhD. Look at the merit of what he's actually saying. Question it, analyze it, and then understand it. And I keep hoping that whatever I put out there is understandable, especially in the field of conservation, is understandable to those who did not study conservation. That's what makes it useful. Otherwise, otherwise it's not of any use to anybody outside my field. And that's why I put more importance on writing in popular press, blogs, or even monologues like this than publishing in peer-reviewed journals. I don't write in journals anymore because I found that is useless, and that's my philosophical position. Find a philosophical position and treat those who don't have philosophical positions with the contempt they deserve because they're wasting your time.